We are on air.
Hello again. From me, Mark Davenport, here as usual with my mate and motivator,
That's me.
as we continue these Thursday talks from the Wisdom Factory. And this is our series we call Conscious Aging. Today, talking about unmasking internalized ageism. But first, Heidi has a few words to say about how to view and participate today.
Yeah. Today we are streaming via Google Hangouts, and as a live event, you can find it on the Wisdom Factory.
Net.net.
Yeah, that is what I wanted to say later. You know, I wanted to say that we are on our Wisdom Factory YouTube channel, and you can watch it there, but we don't have chats there. And so if you want to write your comments or your questions, please go place, and you will be guided to the event page of our guest, who is called Susan Farling.
Oh, well, then I guess it's time for Susan to say hello. Say hello, Susan.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me on your program. I appreciate that. Both of you, Mark and Heidi.
Thank you.
And she's coming from Canada.
Yeah, not Vancouver, but Victoria. Yeah.
And Victoria. We are in Italy. So she is in the morning and we are in the evening. It's dark, really dark outside. So let's go on.
But she has behind her some 3 decades of experience in helping people deal with the changes that happen to all of us if we're lucky enough so that we have to deal with them. She says that often we are our own worst enemy because of the false stereotypes that we've carried around with us about how old folks should be. And paradoxically, this is great. To this, polls show that most of us get happier as we get older. So, Susan, please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in helping people going through this inevitable age transition.
Before we go to the ageism.
Yes. Well, thank you for that introduction. And I started out working with, and I have now, a general practice. So I see people of from 18 till well into their 80s. And I've enjoyed working with various transitions over the years, but I'm focusing more and more now on that, the transition that happens around retirement. And I find that fascinating for several reasons. One is that many of my friends are retiring, and I'm watching them go through a process that I find at times and surprising. And I think of my own father's challenges when he went through retirement, and my own aging, and I find myself more and more passionate about attending to the developmental stages that happen as we age, rather than thinking of aging as a fading out and letting go. That there are actually some very potentially expansive and exciting stages of growth available for us if we're willing. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that you have a general practice, which includes much younger people also. Because it reminds me that, we don't ask for these changes to happen. I never asked for puberty, did you? No, and on it came. So we had to adjust and deal, and it was terribly confusing time.
That's right.
Yeah, and this just keeps on happening.
Yes, it does. And one of the interesting things about aging is, of course, it happens to all of us, but the ageism starts even when we're very young. So it's as though we kind of lay the groundwork for internalized ageism starting early on in our culture, our youth-obsessed culture, really.
No. I remember noticing my grandmother, and I touched her arm, and it felt so funny, you know.
Yes.
Oh, it was kind of repulsive. Oh my God, it didn't feel like my arm at all, you know.
Yeah, and then it remains funny as long as there is no explanation about it. If it is in the line, oh, this is horrible, then it remains horrible. And so these ageist ideas get created, you know. Instead, when you tell to the child, oh, look at this, look how it looks like and how it feels like, and it's different. Oh, look how interesting. There wouldn't come an ageist idea, no. But culturally we don't do that.
That's right. I remember a similar experience touching my mother's back and feeling how different it was to my own. And the interesting thing now is, as I age, I notice that I'm developing my mother's, you know, the same feeling, and it's how to live in and live with an aging body and live with vitality and confidence in one's worth in an ageist society. So that's my current interest and passion.
Yeah, and I would just like to add to my understanding of ageism is you don't have to be old to be a victim of it. You can be quite young too.
Absolutely.
Just people expect to be a certain way because of their age, nothing else.
And then some professional things are only available until, 25 or 30. And with 30, you are not really old, but you are too old for many things. So that's ageism even begins with children. I heard a case, a young person who is a website developer or IT person. I mean, he is writing code and all this stuff. I think he's 14 and has created apps and has an online business. And he cannot have a bank account because he's 14. Ageism too, you know.
It is ageism. And so is, children are to be seen and not heard. That's also ageism. Yes. I agree very much.
Yeah.
Well, however, it seems to.
Ideas.
Pardon me?
No, I was just go right ahead. It's all right.
Well, I was just thinking it seems to accelerate as we get older, that kind of disrespect for the obviously aging person. And it can be very subtle, and it's embedded in our language in ways that can undermine without us really knowing how or why we feel maybe deflated or unseen. Just an example is I get called dear now quite frequently by young people, and I believe their hearts are feeling very warm. I think that they are feeling affectionate towards me, but what I feel is it's not necessary. It feels patronizing. I'd rather just be rather than dear.
That's interesting.
Does that make sense? Yeah?
Yes, but I don't mean to catch you up here, but you had a hard time saying what you'd like to be called.
No, we didn't.
Well, whatever I was called before.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
the other one I get now from men is young lady. And so sort of a jolly kind of a ho young lady. And it's like, no, I've actually been thinking of creating little cards to hand out to people who say things like that, just to say, it's okay, you can call me old woman, or you can call me, ma'am or madam or Ms. or whatever. But it seems to me that it's unnecessary to say young lady. Yeah.
We have an experience of that every week when we go to the market practically. We visit a particular produce counter, and the woman behind the counter is very jovial and extroverted and funny, and she always calls me giovanotto, young man,
Oh, and how does that feel? Does that feel good?
I Coming from her, I don't mind it.
No, that's
Yes.
she's joking with
She's
everybody.
joking with everybody.
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
ageism.
That's not ageism.
No.
Uh-huh.
You can feel it also. It's not only the words, it's also the tone with which
Yes.
things are said. Sometimes we talk something which, if it was a different tone, it would mean something. As we are sort of joking, you know,
Yes.
we can
Yes.
make the difference.
Yeah.
But
Well, I find it interesting that I was reading a little article about a woman who was a gerontologist. She's the head of a department in a university, and she said that she's been teaching about ageism for many years and had never expected to experience internalized ageism until she became in her 60s. And then she started worrying about herself becoming frail, about doing that kind of negative projection that I think many people do when they start to become 60 and 70 and 80.
the thing is to make a good distinction of what is reality, because the body gets older and this is reality. Some things don't work anymore as they worked 30 years ago. Or what is this fear, or what will be happening when, and so on, you know. And what I also wanted to add is this internalized ageism, which we have ourselves, and against other people. When he has a certain trouser on, I say, you look like an old man, you know.
Yes, it's true. It's very true.
But I don't tell her she looks fat in those trousers. I wouldn't say that.
That's not ageism. What ism is that one?
That's some other ism. That's some.
Well, that's very interesting that you should say that, because another thing I was reading said that old is equivalent to saying somebody's fat. So I think old is a good word to embrace and claim as we get older. Yeah. And so I think that the internalized ageism is the ageism that gets us to diminish ourselves unnecessarily. I can't do that because I'm too old, or I'll look ridiculous because I'm old if I try to do that sort of thing. And I think that's quite pervasive.
I find myself occasionally, not very often, but I notice it, I use my age as an excuse for not doing something. You know, I could do it, but okay, go ahead. It's fine with me.
This is the other part. That we can use it.
I'm aware of that in myself too, and ready to challenge it. I think that that's one of the reasons I think it's important to become more conscious of the subtle aspects of ageism, because when we internalize them, they become our norm, and then we are not able to actually actively counter them. And so as I am able to identify, you know, that's actually not necessary for you to pull back there. It's important to come forward instead. I can do that as I can name internalized ageism.
We have at least 2 viewers, but I see there are more, but 2 viewers have come out with some comments. One is Vivek, and he says, saw you on Lowell and show, and so he assumes that you're also from Canada. Yes.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
And then there is Susan Ingismundsen.
Ingemundsen.
Yeah, Ingemundsen, yeah. She says, I also feel the same way about comments given to us. Sometimes I am fine and sometimes I'm not. It is the tone, definitely. Yeah, I really would say that's right. Thank you for being here, Susan. The other Susan, both Susans.
Yes. Good to hear from you, Susan.
And if you have questions or want to participate in the conversation via the questions, please write them and I will read them to Susan and she will answer.
Okay. So I have an example of my own internalized ageism that came totally unexpectedly and just surprised me. And it was when I was going to a counter and I was asking for some service, and it was from a young man. And I remember just a really quick flash of shame that he would have to talk to an old woman. And you know, I caught it, and I realized I had a lot of work to do, because that's exactly the kind of inhibiting internal way of thinking that is quite devastating over the long haul to a person's sense of worth. And so it was around things like that that started me on this journey, really.
Yeah.
This is great, but I want to say the opposite thing. What I observe sometimes when very young people do things, and I often have the tendency to dismiss it. What do they know?
Right.
You know, they have no experience yet, and then they pretend to can teach us this and that and whatever. Seems to be strange too, and this is ageism as well, only in the other direction. You know,
it's true. Yes, it is true, and I notice young people, literally people in their teens, who are coming out with inventions to actually clean up the oceans and do amazing things. And I'm just in awe of their what they know and what they're doing and the actions they're taking. So I agree.
Mm-hmm. You have to really pay attention. There is a comment from Vivek, and he says, traditional Eastern cultures traditionally respect age and older people, and they have greater respect. What do you think of it? All three of us, he's saying.
You know, the culture I can speak from is this one. So I understand, though, having done some reading, that there's an appreciation and respect in other cultures. I'm also just a little curious about the notion of disentangling from the material world. As I understand it, that's part of that aging, and the respect that comes is the wise elder who disengages from the world a bit. I'm wondering if that's part of that, those cultures that person's talking about. I don't know.
That could be a stereotype too, because sometimes I think the patriarch of the family, the matriarch of the family, can be quite tyrannical, and just really try to rule the lives of the younger generation, especially the women in the younger generation.
Yeah. Are you thinking in terms of? Are you thinking in terms of traditional society, North American society, European society?
Well, I was thinking of an Indian society. That is, I worked with a woman from India, and she was getting very upset. Wedding coming up, and there was going to be a grand affair, and suddenly the grandfather says, "I'm not feeling well, so don't do it now." And meanwhile, they had bought thousands of dollars in airline tickets, and all of these arrangements they've made. And I convinced her, don't let that old man get in the way of your marriage. If your daughter's married, just go ahead and do it anyway. And she did, and I felt really good about that, because yes, she did. Yeah. So stereotypes can bite us in the butt no matter where we live.
It's true. That's right. Yeah, that's true.
Oh, it gets complicated. There's so many things that affect who we are and how we act and the situation we run into in our daily lives, as well as
it's true.
Unaware, unconscious.
Yes.
And I think this is the good thing of our times, that consciousness and becoming aware of things is so much more normal. And so we have the possibility to question ourselves without shaming ourselves for doing things which, we have always done because we were taught to do that, that we can slowly take a distance from what we have learned, which seems so normal, and re-examine the language and also the way of doing. What are we doing, you know? Because often an unconscious person is just doing, for instance, an old person, you know, or they kick them away. Or what is the other point is care. For instance, an old person like him, I would take him and bring him over the street.
Yeah, let me alone.
That's right. That's true. Yes, I agree. It's it very much is there's that dichotomy. Yes. Yeah.
You take them autonomy away when we try to overhelp, or I don't know how to express that.
Yes.
If we think we have to do everything for them only because they're a little bit older.
Yes.
No, not really, because this is ageism too. But then we have to deal with our own bad feeling. Oh, I cannot, that woman or that man, it takes so long until he has done, you know, whatever he does. And if I help them, it is much quicker. That has to do with us and not with the other people. And
well, it certainly does. Yes. And also what happens, or can happen, I think, with that kind of unnecessary support or help can be that the person begins to feel much frailer than they actually are.
Exactly.
You know, and that's the internalized piece. Yeah.
Exactly. And we are sort of reinforcing.
Yes.
And that I don't say that I say to an old man who just doesn't make it to get out of his chair, come on, do it yourself. That's not the way either.
No.
But we need to be so much more discriminating of what is right and what is wrong towards ourselves and towards others.
Yes, to become really sensitized to it.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. So in your practice, you are so working with people, and do you work also because they are sort of suffering this ageism, or do you address it? Does it come out by chance, or do they come to see you for that?
Not specifically at this point. I think I'm going to switch my practice so that I am much more focused on people who are in retirement age. But in my general practice, I have worked with people who are retiring and people who are older, and it certainly does come up there. Particularly, interestingly enough, in my experience with men who've been very active and very engaged in their work, and then move into fear of wondering why should they get up in the morning after they retire? Where will they find their worth? Who will be their social circle? Those sorts of things. Yeah.
That was me. It was the other way around. While I was working, I wondered how I could get up in the morning.
Well, that's great. Then you have a well-rounded approach to life. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Remember that, a well-rounded approach. Okay.
Okay.
This brings up another point. Friend who is very knowledgeable about human development, and has quite a reputation in our circles as being a pretty wise person, and he's now retired also. But he's proposing that a huge chunk of the population, a bigger chunk than we have ever been in history, and as such, there's this whole new way of looking at things, this whole new, he calls it a new level of consciousness that is emerging.
Yes.
In activity, in being noticed, and being something that has to be dealt with by society. And he feels very confident that we, as older people
I think it's fine to be. Yes.
Yeah. We can return to a state of respect and wisdom again,
yes.
Just because people have to pay attention to us if no other reason. And that would be great, rather than accepting what younger people think older people are supposed to be, how they live, you know.
Yes.
But I have to come in to make us visible. We have to step out and say, hello, here we are.
Absolutely.
We are not yet in the grave. We want to have our place in society.
Well, here we are.
Well, there's that vast potential for mentoring, which is wonderful. Yeah. And then I'm sure you read the article. I'm trying to remember the name of the fellow who wrote the article on gerotranscendence. Mm-hmm. That was a fabulous article, and he talks about becoming more, having the stages where we become less concerned about ourselves and more concerned about others, and feeling more connected and in a much more transpersonal kind of way, mm-hmm. and that there's a whole development available to us as we age. Is that partially what you're talking about?
Yes, I was saying something like that, or our friend was saying something like that. But mm-hmm. Like a predictable stage, but only emerging now.
And this is also a question of voice, conscious or unconscious choice. Mm-hmm. And with that, I want to come to the comment which Susan has written. She asks you, could you please talk about the hopelessness people feel around aging and approaching death? What we said before, it's not everybody feeling like this. So mm-hmm. how can we make the distinction, and what can you say about to those people who feel hopeless and the approaching of death?
And fear approaching death. Mm-hmm. That's, yes. Well, I think that it's so not only individual. I mean, I think many people feel a hopelessness and a despair if they're isolated, if they don't have a community of people to connect with and talk about their experiences and their feelings with. And I'm actually quite heartened by my communities. We're talking about aging and death in the communities I belong to. I notice out in the larger world that there's other larger groups starting to talk about conscious dying. But for people who are feeling hopeless and frightened, the most I could suggest to them is to reach out and to share their despair with people who can hear them. Because there are obviously, and it's associated with so many different things like how much money the person has that they can help themselves to create some health, or how many, what class they belong to, and what their experiences have been, and what their history is. And there's just so many things that contribute to our sense of well-being or our sense of despair around growing older. Many older people describe, surprisingly, that they feel less frightened of dying as they mm-hmm. approach their dying, and that they live well into towards their dying, but don't feel it as quite such a huge change, that it's a transition that starts to become more, feel more natural the closer that it becomes. So again, I would just say to the person who's feeling those tough feelings to reach out if they can, if it's to a neighbor, to a relative, to a professional, to a friend, and get support around those feelings so that they can hopefully move them and find a place of comfort, which may be not anything that has comforted them in the past, but might comfort them in the present. And I wonder if that touches on what that question was.
Yeah, and I think it has very much to do with the taboo of age, mm-hmm. first of all. When we do these series, there's much less viewers than when we do some more, women and power or something. The people come.
Yes. The lowest was.
And death is even more taboo.
Yeah.
We have a friend I wanted to say to Susan, we have a friend, and she has done for, I think, 2 years a show which is called The Death Chicks. And she has given all sorts of interviews with people who can help, can give you a perspective that death is not what we think it is, because we fear actually what we don't know.
Yes.
Yeah, in her show, so many people were interviewed. I would really recommend to whoever fears death to go to her shows, The Death Chicks. You will find them on YouTube, and really amazing what from how many perspectives they are looking to death. And you know, I feel that, I mean, because it's becoming something real and not something which is, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, you know. So
yes. In fact, I was looking at a program just recently of people who are creating their own caskets, and they're decorating them, and then have them as furniture in their homes, and are quite delighted with what they're doing. And you know, you can take it, I think, to whatever level you want.
Yeah,
it is a challenge.
That sounds a little creepy to me. But,
well, you know what? They were having a lot of fun. Yeah.
That brings me to the other topic, that when you don't have anything in life what is worth living for, then it's a problem.
Yes.
But as soon as you have something which is igniting you, for us as doing these shows and getting to know other people, it's really great. And you know why you get up in the morning, and you know, the moment when you get a little bit down, oh no, tonight we need Susan, or tonight we need Vivek, or whoever, you know.
Lovely.
So this is just a different approach. But if you are alone, as you say, and these feelings come, but they are not necessarily real, you know.
But you know, this progress has come at a certain price too. That happened to us before we were open to, for example, looking at death in a different way. You know.
Yeah.
And I mean, in my case, it was my daughter's death 3 years ago from breast cancer, you know, and she was 32.
Yes.
And so I had to go through a lot of work. We did much of that together, you know, to understand that and accept it and get help for it.
That's a tough experience to go through, boy.
Yeah.
But we were not talking about death here. We were talking about ageism.
And neither were the people.
Deathism.
Deathism. Oh, I don't know if that'll fly. Deathism.
Okay, go ahead a little bit, Susan.
I didn't actually, I didn't have a follow-up for that right now. So you go ahead.
We can go to you have written a book, and we can go to that.
Yes, I have.
And you can explain a little bit what it is about and what people can use it for, where they can get it, and so on.
Thank you. Yes, I wrote a book called One Choice at a Time, A Practical Guide to Well-Being. Here it is. It's available through me, through my website. And
can you name your website? Or?
It's www.susanfarling.com.
Okay.
And the book emerged out of 27 years in private practice. And over time, I started to notice that there was a pattern to what I was teaching people. And I was using exercises that I use myself to maintain well-being. And so I decided to pull the major ones together and weave them together with stories of composite clients to illustrate them, and then also stories from my own life. And so it's a pretty rich compilation of very practical tools and inspiring stories of people using those practical tools. And it's my belief is that if people dive in and actually take charge in and do the exercises and practice them, that they literally can change their lives in the direction of well-being and confidence and more vitality.
Are these exercises directed to ageism or to?
No, not at all. No,
okay.
No, this was very much from my general practice, and so they're directed to people who are in transition. Usually people go towards that kind of a book when they're in a transition and wondering what to do next and how to go about creating the kind of life they want for themselves. And so it's appropriate for that.
And also for not to fall into ageism towards oneself, no? Because
that's right.
That would be the automatic follow-up if you...
Well, it's true. There's an exercise in there that I call a friendship filter. And it's a filter through which I invite people to challenge their thinking, to ask themselves, would they speak that way to a good friend? Would they speak that way to somebody that they wanted to have a really good relationship with? Would they speak that way to somebody that they wanted to have a lifelong loving relationship with? And if they wouldn't, then don't say it to themselves. And often that ageism can be caught in that filter. So if somebody says to, pardon me? Yeah.
I like it and simple. Yeah. I like that approach.
Yeah. And as we are talking about ageism, I would be interested, is there somebody working on a vocabulary of ageism? Do you know that?
Pardon me, what was...
On a vocabulary, what are the
vocabulary? That is so interesting. Yes, people are. I have an article that I've been looking at that talks about language and ageism, and the subtleties of that. And yes, there are. I think there are people working on becoming far more enlightened around the aging process and around internalized ageism, and I think that's happening all over the place now. So hopefully it will come out into the larger society too.
Yeah, and if you have the link at hand, you can send it to me and I can publish it on the event page, because that is really interesting too. Because I'm quite sure that most of us are not aware that some expressions are, let's say differently. I ask myself often, can I say, for instance, I'm old, or is it already ageist? So what is the, how do you say, the limit? Where does ageism begin and where is normal language? Because I don't want that every word will be tagged and censored, for ageist. But
I think it's very interesting, and it's like I would love the word old to be a valued word, in it, and a welcomed word. So, but I don't think it is in the larger society, and I think a lot of, particularly for women, appearance things that go on around aging and attempting to not look older, kind of point to that. You were going to say something, Heidi, I saw.
Yeah, I was wondering, how do I get that together now? Yeah, let's go to the women thing. This is also a fact which I'm always wondering. Why do women want young and not follow the life? I mean, we know from spirituality, accept yourself as you are and blah, blah. But still, I mean, when I look up in the internet, women, pictures for women, then you see all these wonderful young people, and hardly I ever find, for instance, an older couple for relationship topics. It seems to be young is a special value. How?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, and
for a number of reasons, I think. And one of the things I think.
Yeah,
go ahead. Well, I was just thinking that, I mean, we live in a culture that values the ability to produce and work. And so that's one thing that when a worker, when there's this retirement cutoff age and a person is then considered useless, so the desire is to be youthful, there's that piece of it. There's also the wanting to be attractive and appear desirable to men in a patriarchal culture. And I think that that's one other thing that drives that desire for women, in many women, to look younger.
Mm-hmm.
Those are
and
two.
the male form of that. The male form of that is wanting to look prosperous and powerful.
Yes.
So that they'll be attractive to those.
That's right.
Things.
That's right. That's right.
So
That's right.
It's a game we both play. We all play.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I heard you told me that some days ago a model who was super thin, she died after 14 hours of modeling because, you know, when you eat only 3 strawberries a day, I mean, I'm challenging here our image of our self-image, what we think we should be, and what instead of the reality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, when going back to what Vivek wrote before, recognize that women, for instance, are considered, when they are getting in menopause, that they are finally in their real potential in many cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And I can agree.
The crown.
Yes, me too.
Yeah. And most women can agree. And so why don't we bring this message out a little bit better? And I had a friend, she was so afraid of going into menopause because then the life is over. No, it's not. It's getting better and better and better and better.
Yes,
if you do so.
Yes, I think that's true.
Her life, as she knew it, was over. You know, as a sexual partner, as a mother, probably as a homemaker, as someone who was always, 39.
Right. I think that it's. I know that there's a liberation that can come with acceptance that. I experienced myself when I stopped dyeing my hair. I felt liberated. I felt that I could step into more my age, and it felt wonderful. But I couldn't have necessarily known that earlier.
No.
And I think that's one of the things that we're doing right now is in talking about this, is opening it up more. And I think that that's another of the mentoring functions that as we age, we can offer.
Mm-hmm.
To say, come on, this is great. This can be quite wonderful. And yes, there are disadvantages, physical disadvantages, or, and there are many compensating factors to aging.
Absolutely. I'm seeing here another comment from Vivek, and he says, I would like to know some action items from the panel members, please. I think we do need a balance between the Eastern and Western cultures. There are good things in both, but sadly, many times we seem to take the negative aspects of both the cultures and create a most horrible culture by that.
Best of both worlds, huh?
Or the worst of both worlds is this.
Right. So what would be the best of both worlds? Certainly, I think that many people in North America are challenging for example, the 2-person, 1-family vision as we age, and look to more communal living. There's more people that I know are either tiptoeing or diving into joint living situations, and I know that in Europe that's been common for many, many years. And so I would consider that to be a kind of a cross-cultural positive. In my understanding of extended families in places like India, that people live together more than live in isolation. I think that's a big benefit.
Another point I think in Western culture that is encouraging is that we're starting to get gerontology, not the study of illness, but just the study of aging, what it's like, aging itself.
Yes.
So that gerontologists don't see people as suffering from this, that, and the other thing. Ordinary medicine does. Otherwise,
yes,
treat. Who will pay for anything? So
right.
I think there's a lot of research going into just what aging is and actually how we can extend healthy life, longer.
Yes.
Not just live longer, but live healthily longer.
Yes. I think that we've extended our age some 30 years over the last century or so. So there's a lot that's a lot of why we can have these conversations about adult development going on, because of that, because we are healthier, because we do take advantage of Western medicine, Eastern medicine,
And we have accepted the idea that even if you are 50 or 60, you still can learn something. You still can develop. Because before they said, oh, I'm 50, that's too late,
I don't want to learn anything.
There are still people who do that, but there's enough people who say, no, I don't buy into that. But I want to go back to ageism. How would you think we should call us, older people, or other older people? Elders, seniors? I don't like seniors.
No.
Sounds horrible.
I like elders. I like elders.
It has a
or olders
attached to it, yeah.
Or I don't particularly like seniors either.
Senior moment.
Well, that is considered to be an ageist statement, the senior moment. So because it usually means a loss of a memory, but I like to think perhaps we could call senior moments of joy, moments of fulfillment, moments of pleasure. We can start claiming language and have it mean things.
Yes.
Oh, then actively do it. Now, I have a senior moment now.
Yes.
Yeah. Hope you have one too.
That's right. That's it.
So we have to rewrite the story.
Yeah,
yes, I think so. Exactly. Yeah.
And if a 14-year-old forgets something, nobody says, oh, she's having a junior moment.
That's so true. I mean, kids leave little trails of clothing behind them. Nobody thinks that that's a terrible, awful thing. They think that that's just forgetful.
And we do forget, thanks God, because if we hadn't the capacity to forget, we would get crazy.
Oh,
yeah. Yes.
So what
you asked?
Yeah.
Sorry, honey.
No, go ahead.
You asked me about a link to an article, and I'll email that to you after the show, if that's okay.
I'll publish it. Yeah. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Good.
Now I forgot what I wanted to ask. Oh yeah, but out of your practice, out of the book, what could you give an advice to a person who is, let's say, 58, 60 comes, or 68 and 70 comes? What would you do? Just give ad hoc an advice to them. How can they approach transition without beating themselves up?
Right. Well, again, I think it's very important to reach out to people who are on the same path, or to people who are successfully transitioning in their view. There's always a letting go in a transition. There's always a saying goodbye to something. And so there will be that, I think it's important to know to be able to look at that and to hold that as important, and then to move into, oh, this is what might be coming, and to have a period of just a great deal of compassion, self-compassion for the transition period, the place of not knowing what's going to happen and what this is going to be like, and how will what will my life be like? And again, to reach out. There are wonderful communities online for people who are aging, to take concerns and questions if you don't have an immediate circle to go to. But I would, people say it's hard to make friends when you get older, but I think actually we need people all our lives, and that to engage in rich conversations with people of all ages about concerns about aging. And I know that I look for inspiration to people who are my elders. I know that there are people who are like the super agers, who are like the Olympic athletes of aging, and I think they're inspiring, but I don't think I'm going to be pumping iron in that way. But to look at people who are living lives fully, and even with illnesses and with chronic illnesses, because that happens to many of us, to live well with those what could be inconveniences, but to carry on and to be alive, and yes, to hold steady, and then to know that they can move forward into life that can be as fulfilling as it has ever been. And in fact, they can perhaps draw on aspects of themselves that they haven't been able to up until now, and reveal themselves to themselves in new ways. So
I would go into this fear not to make friendships or contacts anymore. I have two suggestions. One is, and go where all the dogs go, and
yes.
There are these fences, and you have, even if you go through the streets, you have, if it's a sweet dog, you have immediately people stopping of all ages, and you can make contact and get into conversation. It's very, very easy. And the other conversation, the other suggestion is, because of my inclination of being a singer, go into a choir. It's not a professional, a high quality choir, probably, because the voices, not trained voices, will get a little less potent when we get older. But there are community choirs. There are, like Laurel Ann is going to, or church choirs. Even if you don't believe in church things, but the choir, you can go and sing. And singing is one of the best ways to keep the mind, the brain in action. So
I think that's a great idea. I've done that myself, and it's wonderful. Yeah.
Wonderful. Great.
Exactly. And also there are things like Meetup. There's lots of ways to reach out. I know that some people find it difficult to do that, though. But another thing to look forward to is challenging oneself in new ways, so that there can be growth that's unexpected. For example, I recently joined Toastmasters, and I'm loving it, and I'm finding it a stretch, but it's taking me into aspects of my own self that I had no idea were there, and I'm actually really enjoying it. Whereas I used to have knees that quaked whenever I stood up in front of people, I now feel relatively confident and comfortable. So it's great.
That is great.
That is good.
And exactly the thing, it's not to give in and say, oh, the others have to come and talk to me, then I might go into contact. But no, we have to get the responsibility to step up for ourselves and to go into the, how do you say, go out of the comfort zone. And just try it out. Take it as an exercise. And if it doesn't go well the first time, who cares? Try it again.
Try something else,
So letting go of the perfectionism that everything must immediately work, or
Yes.
I despair.
Well,
Yes.
absolutely. 20 years ago, neither you nor I would be sitting in these seats talking like this.
No. 20 years ago, I wouldn't have opened mouth except on the stage for
Yes.
singing, but not
Yes.
as a person, talking
Yes.
like I do now. So
yeah. Well, that's one of the developmental stages too, is around becoming much more tolerant, a lot less dualistic in approach, a lot less this is good and this is bad, but much more open, which is a lovely aspect of growing older.
Yeah, and it is not so important anymore, You don't, if you make an error, I mean, the boss wouldn't come anymore and kick you down, and your career would be gone, because we don't have this sort of career anymore.
Yes.
So we create our own career.
That's right.
We are less like other people between one another than we have ever been. I'm reminded of a gerontologist's comment that, well, if you've seen one 80-year-old, then you've seen one 80-year-old.
Yes. Good.
You cannot.
Yeah.
That's just
wonderful.
one.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, we are almost on top of the hour, and I want to recognize there is Georgi Stankov, and he says a wonderful talk show with the exceptional therapist and writer Susan Farling.
Oh, how lovely. Thank you.
Topics: ageism, fear of death, and what is aging as a self-perception, etc. I would like to ask Mrs. Farling how other adults could overcome ageism.
Older adults.
Oh, excuse me, I cannot even read anymore.
How older adults can overcome ageism?
Yes.
That's what we've been
Well, I
talking
think
about.
again, I think it's becoming more and more aware of what it is, and not accepting it internally, and being able to name it, and externally, not necessarily to be disruptive or anything in your situations, but to know if something's an ageist thing, not to bring it in and take it on.
I think Georgi is talking about his father in this case, as far as I remember. And so the question is, if you have parents who are in ageism engaged, how can you talk with them and to help them to let go of this preconception of ageism?
I guess I would want to engage them with what is meaningful to them, and where is their interest, where is their excitement, where is their juice. That might, in a way, be a kind of a coming at it in a sideways way, but to engage their vitality, and that thereby they can demonstrate their own vitality to themselves, and they don't need to be convinced of anything.
Positive reinforcement of when they show interest, probably reinforce that in some way. I could imagine that. Thank you for your comment. And then there's another one of Susan: keeping our sense of humor in all things is essential. I can tell you what, I've never laughed as much as I do since I know him. We are 6 years
together. Isn't that great?
Before I was so serious, German serious, The sense of humor. And this really wonderful. Is nice. Yeah. This is a good recipe I can give to everybody.
It's true. In fact, when my mother went into a home at one point, and I used to visit her, that humor was what of the people there was what really struck me. That they were very, very old, and they were often very, very funny. Yeah.
Good.
So let's take the perspective or the decision to become very old and very funny.
Very lighthearted, eh? Yes.
So far, so. Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. Wonderful.
So Susan, thank you very, 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 very much to have been here, and I hope we can continue this conversation another time.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to ask you is there something which you have not said yet and would like to say before we close?
What a wonderful question. You know, thank you very much. But I think we've covered what I was hoping to cover, and hopefully it's been useful for our listeners. You know, hopefully it will open up some avenue for them.
Good.
And so thank you both. I appreciate
it. And to the listeners who are listening now or later, go and get her book by contacting her on her website, susanfarling.com.
Yeah.
And I want to thank Susan for helping to create an atmosphere where we felt very much like we were just sitting across the kitchen table from you.
How lovely. That's lovely.
It was really nice.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
Thank you both.
Bye-bye. Thank you for having watched. And we see you next week. Bye-bye.
Live long and prosper.
Prosper.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.